Good evening. I'm doing my prominent resource and archaeological research. I want to go over the first one, which would be my book. The book that I chose was a biblical archaeology, a case for biblical archaeology. I found it gave an in-depth treatment of the excavations of Kadesh Barnea, or what is known as Tel in Quadirat. The area of the mound is about three-fourths of an acre. The exploration of the tell began with investigators Leonard Woolery and T.E. Lawrence in 1914. As a part of their survey for the Palestine Exploration Fund, they examined the site and drew plans of the remains there. The excavation followed this under direction of Mr. Dothan in 1956 and work by Rudolph Cohen 1976 to 1982. Kadesh Barnea was an important site in the Old Testament, and it's mentioned frequently concerning the wilderness wandering of Israel in the Old Testament. It is very informative on the three main settlement phrases of the mound. I thought that was interesting. Each containing a fortress complex. The archaeologists uncovered minimal archaeological remains from the earliest level two casemate rooms with curved outer walls. Cohen has suggested that this earlier fortress was oval shaped. The pottery from the two rooms indicated that the fortress belonged to the 10th through the 9th centuries. The second fortress was a rectangular structure with a solid outer wall that was at least 13 feet wide, I believe. Square towers projected from the outer wall of at each corner of the fortress, and in the middle, each side, for a total of 8 towers. It said that there was no gate complex that has been found. The pottery from this period was primarily wheel made, dating the structures to the 8th through the 7th century BC. And then the latest fortress was built with a design similar to the previous one, although the outer wall was casemate rather than solid. It included 8 projecting towers that were attached to those previous structures. Um, the last occupation was rich in pottery finds and dates to the 11th through the 6th century BC, and no evidence exists at the site. The remains of prior to the 10th century BC. So my book again was a case for biblical archaeology, and enjoyed that. Secondly, then my journal article was on the 5 seasons of excavation on Tallahassee from 1970 to 1977. I found that Esrain was talking about this to be a very scholarly article. Had an excellent in-depth study of Tallahassee. It holds a unique place in the history of Palestine archaeology. It was the first Palestinian site at which the relationship between pottery and stratigraphy was shown to be significant. As we learned in class, in 1890, Sir Flinders Petrie was one of the truly great figures in Near Eastern archaeology. Excavated Tallahassee for 6 weeks and produced a great picture of the site's occupation history. Although the 1891 publication of his work incorrectly identified the site as biblical Lachish, it was the first discussion of Palestinian archaeology recognized the importance of pottery for chronological distinction. So I thought that was interesting. Petrie's excavation of the Acropolis had been limited to probing along its slopes since the summit was under cultivation. In 1891 and 1892, Frederick Joan Bliss extended Petrie's project to the top of the mound. His strategy was to excavate a large portion to tell um, a virgin soil. Um, the result cut nearly the entire north third of the Acropolis. It's called a bliss cut, I guess. Um, and it has been a distinguished feature of Tallahassee ever since. Um, but in its publications of the cities in 1894 was the first effort presenting a large-scale excavations resulting in strategic context. Today, utilizing archaeological advances accumulated over 75 years of archaeologists have reopened the investigation of Tallahassee. So, really enjoyed the 5 seasons of excavation on the article one night on Tallahassee. Again, there and for my journal article, and then thirdly, my encyclopedia I chose was the new Archaeological Encyclopedia of the Holy Land on Tel Museum. It seemed to be a solid source in the early reports of Tel Museum between 1926 and 1933. It presented the country's first clear ceramic chronology. From a historical point of view, the most important single result was the clarification of archaeological history of the country in the Middle Bronze Age. In this excavator's opinion, this has helped provide a basic framework for biblical patriarchal traditions. Talbot Museum was contributed materially to our understanding of Israelite conquest in its nature, helping fix its chronology. At the time of its excavation, the site was best preserved example of a town in Judah from the century immediately preceding the destruction of the first temple. From it, the material culture of this period could be reconstructed in considerable detail. Talbot Museum was the first excavated site to furnish tangible evidence confirming biblical picture of the destruction of the cities in Judah by the Babylonians. So that's important there. And then it says for many years, F.W. Albright's excavation of Talbot Museum and his 4 volumes of final reports were the cornerstone of ceramic typology and chronology of biblical Palestine. However, the development of a more rigorous methods of excavation and strategic analysis, Albright's stratigraphy depended largely on identification of major burn layers, pottery, has led to several attempts to reassess his major strata and finds. And so, and then lastly, it says there is no known biblical correlate to Talbot Museum. So, really enjoyed um, the article on, or the encyclopedia that is on the new archaeological encyclopedia of the Holy Land. Then, lastly, my website that I chose was Biblical Archaeology Report. And I enjoyed this because it was an in-depth study on Jericho and its walls. Um, the ancient city of Jericho has become a ground zero for debate around the historicity of the conquest of Canaan and the reliability of the Bible in general. So there's a lot of controversy that centers around the destruction and the city of Jericho, whether it happened or you know what happened at that time. Everyone agrees that Canaanite Jericho was destroyed in a violent, fiery manner. Um, the problem is not everyone agrees on the date that this happened. So, the first excavator, Seelan and Wattsinger, who dug from 1907 to 1909, concluded that Jericho had been destroyed. They say in the Middle Bronze Age by at least 1600 BC. But then in the 1930s, British archaeologist John Garstang excavated the residential area of Jericho and concluded that the fiery destruction of the city occurred in the late Bronze Age in 1400 BC. And when he did that, he linked that with Joshua and the Israelites. Um, Problem is, later on, from 1952 to 1958, a lady by the name of Kathleen Kenton, I'm sorry, excavated at Jericho and dated the destruction of the city to the end of the Middle Bronze Age in the 1550. That's a major problem because the date of destruction of the city to the end of the Middle Bronze Age of 1550, meaning that there was no city of Jericho for Joshua to conquer at the time the Bible describes the conquest of Canaan. So that obviously that presents an issue as to who's right and who's wrong. But then more recently, archaeologist Brian Wood has suggested that Kenyon's analysis of the date and the destruction is incorrect. And one of his reasons is because she failed to take the pottery in consideration during that time to properly link it like Garstein did to Joshua and the Israelites. And one of the things I found that in this website that it had left um, from a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Kitchens a maximum. It says the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So I thought that was very interesting. And that's specifically on this subject. And still to this day, it's still um, controversy sent around who's right or who's wrong. But Bryant Wood um, says that he sides more with the original date that Garstang had of 1400 BC, which he believes that is the correct date. And so really enjoyed doing the prominent resources, and so hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a good day. Thank you.